Welcome to Behind the Educator's Lens, the podcast where we explore the stories, insights, and inspirations behind today's most impactful educators. I'm your host, Robyn Young, instructional coach and consultant for emotional schools. I'm passionate about helping teachers create meaningful learning experiences and bringing these insights directly to them. In this episode, we're diving into a theme that resonates with so many leaders, teachers, and kids alike. But you were a math person. Okay, we are joined today by Aaron Szott. There we go, an educational consultant with over 17 years experience. Aaron works with Alberta math teachers to shift from pressure-driven practices to meaningful learning. Together, we'll explore how math identities are formed, lost, and most importantly, claimed. Aaron, thank you for being here.
Hey, my pleasure, Robyn. Thanks for having me.
So excited to talk to you today. I always like to start out every podcast with a little personalized version of this or that. It's a bit of rapid fire. And this just helps us get to know you a little bit better as an educator. Okay, so first one, mental math or manipulatives?
And I have to choose one, right?
You got to choose one.
Okay, and it's just for me. I'm not saying which one's better.
No, this is just your preference. If you were to do it, what would you choose?
Mental math.
Okay. Group work or solo problem solving?
Group work.
Yeah, my favorite. I love group work. Geometry or algebra?
Tough to choose. I'm going to go with algebra.
See, when I was younger, I used to love algebra too. I loved looking at all of the different formulas. But then as I got older, now I love geometry. Maybe a little bit more of the art mind.
Fine. It's all math.
Yeah, that's true. It is all math. Whiteboard or digital tools?
All right.
Yeah, I love a good whiteboard too.
It would have been good if we could have had chalkboard in there.
You know, I used to teach with a girl who she hated whiteboards. It was like the worst thing for her. She's like, this is that. Give me a chalkboard and I will roll all day long, but you give me a whiteboard and those pens that run out mid-lesson.
Yeah, and the impossible to erase red.
I'll tell you what's impossible to erase. The very first classroom I had an educational assistant with me, and she was trying to take notes on the things that I was talking about, and she grabbed a Sharpie.
Yeah, that's not coming off. But to be clear, the whiteboard digital tool choose between, I'm choosing whiteboard as what I like to work on if I'm engaged in trying to solve a problem, right? If I'm working with a class, I could be happy with whiteboard or other digital tools as well. But when it's just me and I'm trying to get my thoughts out, a whiteboard is a great way to go.
I love that. Old school. Okay, last one. Math games or math journals?
Games.
Me too. Every time.
Yeah, games. I feel like you left out a really critical question.
I did. What is it?
And I think you used it with Nathaniel Swain on a previous podcast. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure you did. But it's critical. So I'm asking you, Rob.
Okay, all right.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
This is going to be like the final this or that question. Star Wars or Star Trek? Jeez, man, that's so hard. Okay. I have to choose Star Wars. And it's because my best friend, Jody, she is hilarious. And when you spend time with her, she starts to do different impersonations. And she can talk to you, like the big brown, what's his name?
Chewbacca?
Chewbacca. Yeah, she talks in Chewy. And so I just start crying. How about you? Star Trek or Star Wars?
Well, you answered incorrectly, so it's going to be a short interview. Star Trek is by far the superior option.
Yeah, I might get kicked out of my family on my husband's side. They are big Trekkies. His mom is a big Trekkie, so but maybe she won't hear this, so maybe I'll be safe. I love it. It's always great. You know what? I'm going to add that on to make sure everybody answers that question. That's great. Thank you so much, Aaron.
You learn more about a person from that question than anything else.
Yeah, that's true. But you know, I can enjoy Star Trek, so I can hang in both fields. So today's theme, but you were a math person, is something that so many educators and students have heard or felt. My children included. Just yesterday, in fact, we were driving in the van and I was talking about how school is coming up and are we looking forward to grade 6 and grade 2? And my grade 5, who used to love math, she said, I'm looking forward to everything but math. I'm just not a math person. So what does that phrase mean to you?
Probably the same as it does for a lot of math educators. It kind of hits you right in the chest. It hurts. That phrase to me, Robyn, is a lament. It's a clear indication that someone at some point in time fell out of love with mathematics, and that fallout usually happens at a young age. And it's not because a young person decides one day, like, I'm just not a math person anymore. I don't like math. They don't decide that, but they are introduced to a whole lot of experiences with other people that might lead them to that conclusion that math is just not for me. But at the same time, that phrase, but you were a math person, can be an open door into a conversation that maybe can invite somebody to remember that time when math actually was for them. Just look at the myriad of children's toys that have survived for generations. They are almost exclusively mathematically based toys. Sorting, numbering, ordering, pattern identification, spatial recognition, like it goes on and on. Matching. That was the basis of those toys. And kids are natural mathematicians. So at some point or another, everybody, I do believe, was a math person. And it's never too late to rediscover that you really are a math person. I think we just need to reframe the idea of what it means to be a math person, because I think most people believe that being a math person means you can perform complicated calculations, you can solve big equations, and that's really not at the heart of what math is.
Yeah, and you mentioned that experience is what can sometimes shape our children's experiences and their thoughts about math. So, what were your early experiences with math? And do you feel like you ever weren't a math person? I think it feels like it looks like you feel like you are a math person. So, what might have shaped this identity for you?
Today, I'm a math person to the nth degree and back. Well, pardon even that expression, even throwing a variable into my description. I'm a math person today. I was absolutely not always a math person. I did not always believe math was for me. If I think of early childhood experiences, the beginnings of those mathematical explorations in school were incredibly positive. It was the 1980s, which I think was probably a great time to grow up. And Midnapore Elementary School in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, I had a group of teachers right from kindergarten to grade 6 that were unbelievable people. I can look back at them now with, I've been in education for about 26 years now, and I can say that I had extraordinary teachers in elementary school. I come to think of them as a group, and if I had to pick a collective noun to describe these people, I think a blessing would be the right word. I had a
Aw.
blessing of elementary school teachers who nurtured. They were so full of compassion and patience and love. And there was never a feeling, I don't think I ever felt unloved in those spaces. So feeling that way opened up the world, not even just for mathematics, just for learning in general. So as an elementary school student, I really liked school, but
Mhm.
things changed when I hit junior high, right? And part of that, of course, is the horrendous change of hormones and the social awkwardness, and really the idea that being a junior high school student is about the most difficult time of your adolescence, and it feels like you're put on a stage with spotlights on you. So not many kids really love that. I don't blame them. But I can recall very specifically that I lost my love of mathematics in junior high school, and that was because of experience with a particular teacher. Instead of the support and love, I had a teacher who actually bullied me, who mocked me openly in class in front of students, made me feel really quite awful about myself and mathematics in general, and that persisted for quite a long time actually. Damage done. And that's not to say all my junior high school teachers were like that. They certainly weren't. Most of my
Mhm.
teachers, I've been lucky. Most of my teachers have been pretty remarkable people. But then I would say, flash forward again in grade 11, I got a chance to actually feel like maybe a math could be for me again. And that was again because of a teacher, Mr. Kozak. I still do in my classes today, and even in my lectures at the University of Calgary, I still do impersonations of Mr. Kozak because there was a lot of wisdom to be gained from him. But he was the first math teacher I ever had that pushed me quite hard to really grasp or to grapple with difficult concepts. At that time, it was the visualization of functions, graphs of functions, and how you can manipulate them. This was the year before TI-83s ever came into existence in the market. So there were no graphing calculators back at this point. Mr. Kozak made us do everything in our heads or on a page, sketch it out, talk me through it. And he was relentless with patience, compassion, and insistence on my success. Success was the only option. Success was the only option for him. And that has really come to inform my ideas of what assessment should and could look like today. But I persisted and I found success. And it was really the first time in a long time that I felt like, hey, I've felt like I've succeeded at doing these mathematical tasks. And that's what made me start feeling like maybe I am a math person. I would like to say, though, from today's perspective, that there's so much more about being a math person than that.
Mhm.
But that was, for me, that ended up being that gateway or that open door. It was encouragement from a teacher.
I always find that interesting about humans in general, and I'm very much the same way too, where we can have this plethora of people telling us, like, I'm here for you, I'm with you, I'm the blessing for you. And then we come across this one person or this one teacher that can really damage that trajectory and almost stay with us as this. I don't know. I like to think about it as we all have the critic in our heads, right? And we don't need somebody else to come along and make that voice stronger. But I find it interesting how it sits with us.
Yep.
But that equally as so, the teachers that come to us and see us for who we are and push us to be greater,
Yeah.
they ultimately win, you know?
Absolutely.
And I love that
Absolutely.
for you, it became this full circle bring back where you weren't sent down that path forever. Like I imagine if perhaps we've been followed up with another teacher who was of the same attitude, right?
Yep.
So
And but that happens, right? I remember my university experience with mathematics went back in the opposite direction again. In my first degree, which was physics, I had to take 4 calculus courses. And calculus for me in high school and beyond was always like taking a mathematical 2x4 to the head. I sure wrestled with understanding calculus. So for students that wrestle with that today, I deeply understand and can empathize what that process was like. But I remember at the end of 4 years of getting through calculus, I remember my calculus instructor going to me and saying, "You should rethink a career in physics." That was
mm,
what he said after 4 courses and 2 years working with each other. That was his parting comment to me. And I thought, oh well, thanks. I'm trying here, like I really am. My aha moment in understanding calculus came in the final year of my first degree. I was like the latest bloomer I have ever met when it came to truly understanding. And I swear to you, it honestly was like a light bulb moment. I remember exactly where and when it happened, in the middle of what class it happened, and it was like, bing! Oh my god! I get it. My brain needed to sit on this stuff for so long.
well, so university is that time where almost all these wonderings and thoughts and experiences can come together for you. Like I did not think I was going to be a teacher at first. I was wrestling with criminology, and I remember loving it, but then going to the classes and falling asleep and doing really well in the exams because I was interested in it, but just not finding that same passion. And it was the same moment. I remember the professor stood up and he said, "Listen, how is it that the girl at the back who's sleeping through this entire course is getting a higher score than all of you?" I, in
Oh God,
that
you know this.
moment, I really thought, like, okay, this isn't for me. It doesn't matter if you're good at something. If you're sleeping through it, obviously that's not something that's going to work for you. But that was years down the road of taking criminology courses and psychology and learning about all of that and really thinking that's where I was going to go. And then having this moment where I was like, yeah, actually, he's right. So I'm wondering, in your work with Alberta teachers, have you seen common patterns or moments when students begin to feel like they're no longer math people? And do you have some ideas about what might tend to cause that shift?
Yeah, lots, but I don't think there's any one thing. I think for well, not even some. I think for a lot of students, that one thing might be the beginning of it. Right? For me, it was poor teacher, right?
Mhm.
And somebody that was damaging my self-esteem. That was the beginning of that. It didn't necessarily have to be the one thing and that was it. I just shut right off. For me, anyway, that wasn't necessarily the case, but it sure was the beginning. I would say there are a couple of things that come into play both inside and outside of a classroom. Outside of a classroom, there is this really societal normalization of math phobia. The title of this whole thing, but you were a math person. That's the follow-up statement to I'm not a math person. And I think we can all say, yeah, I've heard people say that. I've heard adults say that. I'll say that. I've heard them say it a lot. In fact, I was even commenting on a friend's post today on LinkedIn. They said something like that this morning. And so I was madly posting my response like, hey, no, you are a math person. Look at what you finished with. Like, that's math. So I think that societally there is a normalization, and that has a very profound effect on young ears that hear it. When young people who especially are engaged in activities like puzzles and problem solving and mazes or the toys that do all sorts of mathematical reasoning, they might be in the midst of actually exploring and enjoying mathematics. And around them, they see adults or hear adults say things like, I'm not a math person. And it's socially acceptable. We've as a society think that that's an okay statement to make, and I really don't think it's an okay statement to make. We might be surprised if somebody in conversation would say something like, "Oh well, I'm not a book person. I'm not up for reading." We don't hear somebody say something like that, but we see it from math all the time,
Mhm.
and I think little ears hear that, and little ones will slowly start to believe that, oh well, if adults aren't math people, maybe I'm not either. So I would love for adults to stop saying that statement. I really would. I think within the classrooms, a big part of what happens is assessment. It's how we choose to assess mathematical understanding. And there are lots of traditional grading methods that I think stifle learning and lead students to evaluate themselves based on a mark as
Mhm.
opposed to a level of understanding. And I mean that whole thing, assessment, right? Is there any bigger can of worms discussion you could open up in a room full of educators? Probably not. But our methodologies of assessment, not everywhere, but in a lot of places, I think are really exacerbating that problem where students start believing that math isn't for them. You talked about your daughter going grade 6 already, right? So it does seem to happen at a young age. So
Yeah, I started digging into that with her, and I said, "What does that actually mean when you say that? You love building Lego. You love playing crib. You love
yeah.
playing chess. All these things are math. How do you not love math? What do you mean? What part of it is it that
Mhm.
you don't like? And how come this attitude has just started in the past year or so?" And what
Yeah.
she said to me was that at some point the math stopped being a discussion and it became a worksheet.
Yeah, it's the calculation. It's the
For her, that's why she doesn't enjoy it, is because the interaction piece has become the background to the piece of paper in front of her. So she doesn't see the purpose or the connection or where in the world this math actually even lives.
yeah. Yeah, pretty fair, right?
Yeah, it is definitely fair, and then also so sad because I love making math fun in my classroom. We explore all the ways that math is connected to writing, to reading, to social studies. We take walks of the neighborhood and we make maps and we talk about how that is also you're using your math skills and you're using your area and you're using your perimeter. Yeah, it's so much fun, and we bring in the robots and we do a little bit of technology in there. And the fun thing about robots is they have measurements right in there. So there are so many ways, I think, especially nowadays, to make math fun and engaging. However, it does take a lot of time. And so I also understand how much time it actually takes to put together a lesson that is exciting and will reach all your learners and also moves their math skills forward too. When you have kids coming at you with all different abilities from a very young age.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That really hits at the heart of it, right? Because it's not like teachers aren't wanting to do these things. Teachers en masse want students to engage in mathematics in a way that is fun and that
Mhm.
builds confidence, builds problem solving skills, builds critical thinking skills. Like, of course they want to do that, right? So
Yes.
I hope no teachers listening to us right now would think like, oh, don't they think I want that? Or don't they think I'm trying to make that happen? Fully believe you want that. And there are so many things that stand in the way of a
Yep.
teacher,
Yep.
keeps them from being able to do that, and there are things that are outside of their control, right? Teachers are living in large part in systems where they're forced to live out their professional lives in a way that slows learning, in a way that prevents them from really proactively being able to address the serious problems in math. And that's not because the teacher doesn't want to,
Mhm.
it's because of the constraints that a system that they have to live within are placing on them.
Yes. Yeah, and they have to operate within that system and
Yeah.
answer to it all at the same time. And I
Yeah.
think this might be, and correct me if I'm wrong, where you start to think about these pressure-driven practices that you're trying to help educators move away from. Like, what are some of these barriers that you think are preventing our classrooms from being able to explore mathematics in a way that helps children to continue to believe that they are math people?
Pressures in the system, I mean, they are many. I've been talking with educators all over Alberta for a while. There are all sorts of, I mean, there are two things that are important to really acknowledge and identify. One is that the individual differences from classroom to classroom across Alberta and undoubtedly across BC, across Canada, the differences are actually huge. It's
Mhm.
very different when I'm looking at or conversing with a teacher right here in my hometown of Calgary, or I'm talking with a teacher in St. Paul, where you have smaller communities. The challenges that each community faces are very different and
Mhm.
very real, right? But there are so many issues that also, when we really distill it down, come down to time. Time. Teachers need time. Teachers are going to PD sessions. Teachers are trying to learn new ways of doing things in class. They want to introduce new ideas. They want to do these things. They need time to try the new things, and they need space for it to not work. And that's critical. In fact, you think about the way we want our students to learn. Hey, you didn't do very well on this assessment or this activity. That's okay. Let's talk about what didn't work out. Let's do better in the next try. Let's try it again. We have an attitude that we want to give our students that not getting it right the first time is actually pretty darn normal, right? Like, welcome to my life. This is how it works for all of us. But when it comes to running your classroom with the constraints that teachers are facing everywhere, that option for it to not work out very well becomes less and less realistic in a teacher's mind. And so there's quite a bit of disparity over what it is we want to get students to actually do, and then how we model it in the way that we operate our own classrooms. And again, it's not an indictment to teachers for not doing what they should do. It's a statement that the system that we're living in isn't giving the room and the freedom and the time for teachers to develop these strategies in a classroom. It's very difficult. And you can add to that, let's take for an example, teachers in Alberta teaching math in grade 9 and grade 12. Students are writing provincial exams at the end of those years, and they they really hoping that students in their school perform well on these standardized tests. And now you've got teachers who lose classes left, right, and center. This came up in a number of my conversations. Teachers that lose classes because there's a speaker coming in for social studies. There is a sports event that's going on and students have to leave early. There's a drama production and students need to be able to rehearse. There's a band thing going on. There are so many activities going on in schools that take time from other classes. And having been in a high school math classroom for 17 of my years, yeah, that happened a lot from my class. And I felt it because I was never taking kids from their classes. And so I was losing time. And you lose momentum when you lose those bits of time. And so teachers are trying to keep kids caught up. And of course, oh, well, the student knows they have to stay caught up in your class. Well, that's just not how it ends up working. It often is not how it ends up working. And it becomes a math teacher's responsibility to bring that student back up to speed. And then you've got teachers who have 45 kids in a classroom when it only even fits 35, or they've got split classrooms. They have so many constraints. And those ones teaching, is to my point, grades 9 and 12 also have that outside pressure coming from above that says your kids need to perform well on these tests. And so with all of those constraints, what's a logical path for a teacher to take when they need the way out? I would personally start feeling like I just need to start hitting what's going to be on the test. I'm going to, all right, here, you're going to see a question that looks exactly like this. Here's how you're going to solve it. And when we get down to teaching like that, we're really squeezing the heart of mathematics, right? And not in a good way. We're holding it back, because we're really promoting mimicry as a form of learning at that point. And it's not because teachers think it's a good teaching strategy, it's a survival strategy. And gosh, if I could wave my magic wand and do something, I would love to change the conditions so that no math teacher anywhere ever has to feel like they're in survival mode anymore, because that's when kids can't flourish.
Yeah, time makes it really tough. And then I'm not sure what the solution to that is. Like, do we have kids going to school longer? Is it a 12-month program? How do you create more time in that day or in the year to create the conditions that you talk about that would allow children to really be able, and the phrase I kept coming back to that we often say is kids do well if they can. And I think that what I'm hearing is that adults also do well if they can. And
Absolutely.
so given the constraints, they're doing the best that they can with what they're given, but it's just not enough to actually explore mathematics in the way that it needs to be done.
Yeah. I do believe there are things that they can do, though, even within those constraints. I think that there are actionable things that they could do to start pushing the needle in the right direction. Yeah, there are things that can be done.
Would you like to share some of those things that you think that could be done to
Sure.
help moving the needle in the right direction?
Yeah, micro changes is kind of how I would phrase it. If I were starting my class again in September, I would want to think about what's one, because my plate's going to be full. What's one thing that I can try differently? And it doesn't have to be a huge difference. It can be a small difference. And it doesn't have to be a difference that you just keep doing the whole year. You can modify as you go because you're experimenting. It's more about allowing yourself the freedom to give one little thing a try. But I understand that those time constraints can make trying things difficult because we have a fear of, if I lose more time, I can't cover the curriculum, right? So what are some things I would try? Option one, I would offer reassessments for students. I would let kids rewrite things. And I'm going to rephrase that, because I wouldn't call it a rewrite and I would never call it a retest. I would call it a reassessment. I would give kids an opportunity to reassess, and I would not average their results with the results they had from previous attempts, right? So if a student does better, I'm going to let them have the better result because they've demonstrated mastery of this particular material. If a student does worse, I'm going to give them another opportunity. And I would say that no student has ever been harmed by getting repeated opportunities to demonstrate learning. The thing that most teachers will say, like, well, forget it, I can't do that. Again, it's time, because they're worried about the logistics. I can't let every kid rewrite a test, or I can't let there are other things. You know what? They don't have to rewrite the test. Maybe they just need to demonstrate learning on one of the topics that were covered in the test. So let them do that. Maybe that reassessment doesn't have to be another test. Maybe there's a conversation that you can have with them. Reassessment doesn't have to mean another test. Reassessment does not have to mean you're sitting there and you're marking it again. It doesn't have to look that way. You're the teacher. You've got, in most cases, though I admit not all, there's got to be some kind of autonomy and freedom where you can make the judgment call. I don't know about teachers that might be listening to this, but I can tell you, for all the years that I was teaching, at the end of the year when I would look at my student marks, if something didn't look right, I would change it. I would change that, and I would challenge anybody who would say, well, you can't do that. That's not reasonable or fair. I would say, actually, it is finally fair. It's finally reasonable, because the practice to get here was not reasonable. I don't think there's anybody in a better position to assess a student's learning at the end of a course than the person that walked beside them the whole time. Right? Teachers are professionals, and I rely on their professional judgment. If your kid had an 83 and you thought, well, this kid is actually like at least in university, this kid would have gotten an A. All right, well, then make it an A. Make it whatever your school would have said was an A. Maybe that was a 90. Then make it a 90. Like I understand that a lot of people would say, oh my God, you can't do that. But I think we need to have the conversation, but why can't I do that? And what do we mean by fair, right? It's not fair if you do that for one student versus another. Well, why? This isn't about what happens to another student. And it's not a conversation that has to happen with another student either. But that's a big conversation, but I do believe that there are ways in there that don't have to require enormous amounts of more time from a teacher. Another option, and by the way, if you are worried about that, drop me a connection, find me on LinkedIn, Aaron Szott, Szott, Aaron, if it helps. Find me on LinkedIn and let's have a conversation about that. Start your math classroom with a problem, but have a problem that you know is going to address some of the learning outcomes you want to talk about, but also gives you some opportunities to scaffold a little bit. And then when kids walk in, put them into, and this part's important, there's some research that bears this out, put them in random groups, 3. If you have to do 2, that's fine, but no more than 3 random groups. Get them working on a whiteboard or any other vertical surface, not at a desk, vertical surface, and standing only. Nobody sitting. If you have to, seriously, push the desk to the back of the room if you need to. There's definite research that backs up that this sort of approach can really help, not just developing a better classroom atmosphere, but really opens the doors to critical thinking, problem solving.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of collaboration could go on and some cross transfer of
Exactly.
knowledge. If you can look around the room and you're
Such a
stuck,
key
you might be
point.
able to take a hint from somebody else instead of just, I'm stuck, I'm done.
That's
Whereas
right.
that's what happens when you're working at your desk, is that you can
Yeah.
actually only work with the immediate people around you. But as soon as you're working vertically, you can
Yeah,
see across the whole room and continue to problem solve and
that's
see
right.
what other people are trying.
You see where they all are at the same time as opposed to one at a time. And it gives you the opportunity to float around and engage your students. Engage your students. When you're doing that, you're assessing them.
Yes.
An assessment does not have to be a mark. An assessment can happen in conversation, right? Grade fewer things. Honestly, grade fewer things. If you're grading homework, stop. I would say stop grading homework. That doesn't mean don't give kids feedback. It means stop grading it. You don't have to sit through and do everything and mark it up, because the reality is once you put a number on that page and you give it back to students, a lot of them don't look past the number anyway. Open up at the beginning of the course, have a Google sheet that is for each of your students. Share it with them. There's your assessment. You're giving them feedback. If I'm looking at their homework, I'm flipping through it. Okay, I see what they're doing. You're a math teacher. You've been doing this for years. You're experienced. You're a professional. You don't need an hour to diagnose what might be happening looking at 2 pages of some student's math work. You can see where the problem is. Write 2 sentences on their Google sheet. Here's your feedback. This is what I need to see you working on.
I think that's a great idea for beginning teachers as well, who are also looking at, okay, what am I actually looking for when I am looking at work? Like I know you mentioned teachers who've been doing it for a long time. In BC, we have a ton of teachers who are brand new. And I think that that is a beautiful way for them to be able to plan. So this is what I'm noticing for my class as a whole. This is what I'm noticing from these students. And this is what I need to do next to help them learn and
Yeah,
continue to grow in their math skills.
yeah. And in that feedback, I would never put a number. Right from the get-go, I wouldn't put a number. I would want to build an atmosphere where the students understand that I'm not giving you a number on your homework. I'm going to talk to you.
Yeah.
That's your feedback. It doesn't have
Yeah.
to be great.
Yeah, I know I mentioned this prior, but in BC we have the proficiency scale. But as a
Yeah.
teacher, I know that. But my husband is an ironworker, so he's learning about what this proficiency scale is. And so my daughter has been practicing multiplication, and part of the multiplication was they focused on certain numbers, and then they would do a little quiz to see if they'd gotten those, and they were always marked. And the interesting part was on one of them, it was A, B, C, D, E, F. It was the 6th quiz that they've done. So the teacher had labeled the quiz with F. So my daughter
Yeah.
comes home and she's quite bright. So she'd gotten one wrong, and then she got the inverse question wrong. So she essentially got one question wrong in 2 ways. And then there was the letter of F. And my husband picked it up and he thought, oh my goodness, what is going on in these schools? I can't believe there's an F written on this paper. And I thought, wow, like what a thing that even an accidental letter can do to the psyche of the parents. She was actually also quite distraught that she had made a mistake, but she understood it wasn't a fail.
Yeah.
But then I had to explain to both of them, you have not failed and you have not failed. She has not failed. It's totally fine. So what do you think? I know you've mentioned it a little bit, but what do you think meaningful learning in math really looks like? And how can we help students rediscover their sense of belonging in the subject?
Meaningful learning I think it looks pretty much the same in almost any class. You'll know it, right? When you see it. I asked a similar question to this actually to another former colleague of mine last week. And I liked the first part of his answer. And that was, and I'd asked, like, if I could wave a magic wand, everything was perfect. What would be different? What would you notice, right? What would that transformation be? You would go from something to something, right? What would it be? And his response was, kids would be excited coming to math class. They would come to math class the same way I see a lot of them when they go to their gym class because they're going to be playing a particular sport or doing, whatever it might be. There would be a similar kind of excitement amongst the students as they came to my class, right? And then, when we kept pushing and said, well, what else? Like, what does that look like then once they're in the class? And he said, it looks like students who persist in problem solving, right? It's the grit piece, and we know again in educational research that the grit and perseverance piece is actually the key. It's not about you're a math person. It's that anybody can be a math person. And that is true. Anybody can be a math person. And by that, I even mean anybody can become good at doing complicated calculations. It's more about grit and perseverance than it is about this idea of this innate genius that some people are just born with. They're just naturally gifted at this. Well, no, it's a myth. People who are good at stuff are good at it because they work at it. And students very often will try something, and within 10 seconds, if they're not sure how to solve that problem, well, I'll just wait because I know my teacher's going to go over it. And I think it's important for us to recognize if we see a student doing that, we shouldn't assume that means the student is uninterested or totally disengaged. We've kind of trained them that, hey, if you just wait a minute, I'll show you how to do it. There are ways that you can alter how you're approaching this in the classroom to try to nip that sort of thing in the bud. But yeah, it would look like, your question was, what would this positive sort of learning environment look like? How would it look like if students were engaged again? They would be tackling problems and persisting through.
Yeah, the bell rings and they don't move.
Yeah, they want to solve it. And I'm not saying you have to go full on like gamification in your class, but I am saying that there should be, if you have that element of fun, like to do that sort of thing. It's not that they're afraid to do the thinking. It's that in a large way, they've been trained that they don't have to. So I would say that if you can try to introduce that little bit of fun, let them work with stuff, let them struggle a little bit while you're floating around that class, encourage, right? I'm not saying with toxic positivity, encourage. I'm saying like be a human being. Show them that you try things too, that you fail, and it's okay. It's not about failure. It's about we're either succeeding or we're learning. There isn't failure. We say that sort of stuff a lot as a teacher, but when it comes to how we assess a student, there's a bit of a dichotomy that we introduce there that doesn't line up. So what does it look like? I think it looks like that. But I can imagine teachers listening to us right now are saying in their head, or they're yelling out loud in their car or whatever, going, I know what it looks like. My problem is I have a mountain in my path and I can't get them there.
Yeah.
So I acknowledge that, and getting them there is different for every single person, and it's different for every single teacher. And that's a big conversation, right? You might have 40 students in a class that fits 35. You might be teaching a split class where you have two, and for some people I've talked to, three different classes in the same room at the same time. Maybe your students are hungry, but it's not hunger for knowledge. It's actually hunger for food, because that is a real thing, right? Maybe you have students who are exhausted, but it's not because they were partying all night. It's because they were working. Teachers are facing such a host of diverse problems in their classrooms. And that's coming even outside of those institutional pressures. And so, again, that's why I really come back to the first and foremost, teachers, like, thank you. I know you are doing everything you can. You are trying to hold together these worlds for kids in your hands, and you often do so at your own personal cost. So how do we get you out of that? I think that the only way out of that is by starting by making one small change. Introducing something a little bit different into your classroom and try to re-energize things. One of the other things I would have suggested, hey, you're not ready to try a standards-based mindset of assessment, or maybe you're not ready to let go of the averaging stuff, and that's okay. And maybe you're in a school that won't let you, although there are ways to still work within it. Introduce stories into your math class, right? If you're teaching calculus, right, the first day of calculus can be an incredible story. When you want to talk about limits, you can talk about Zeno's paradoxes. You could talk about Newton's work and the Principia Mathematica, the end of a 2,000-year-old argument about where we were in the universe, John Napier and logarithms, right? Like, these things aren't simply weird mathematical algorithms that I just have to memorize. What a useless thing. These things came about entirely because of usefulness. That's entirely what their birthplace was. It was the nexus of all of it. It was utility and creativity. And all of those things start with a human story. And if students don't feel connected right now to mathematics, maybe we help reconnect them by reminding them that they too are human beings, that they actually are connected to all of those stories, that mathematics is a birthright. There are ways to do that. Even if you feel as a teacher, yeah, but I'm not like showing them how to calculate a limit, but you're talking to them about how to calculate a limit. That means that you're having a discussion. You're engaging them in thought. You are covering curriculum. Don't feel like if you're not teaching them how to calculate something at that moment, that means you're not covering curriculum. You are. You can cover it in all sorts of ways because you are a professional. You do know what you're doing, and it is your classroom. And I want every teacher to feel that empowerment that, hey, I can make these little micro changes. And for example, the storytelling, try it. With AI, especially these days, researching and finding these stories is easier than ever. Try it, just infuse it. It doesn't mean you have to talk to them for an hour about it, although I know I could, but try it. And if it takes an hour, you know what? Let it take an hour. Let them fall into that story because it's the hook. You're going to get more buy-in from them when they feel pulled in. And showing them how to do a calculation isn't necessarily the best way to pull them in. And you might find while you're doing that you get jazzed. I can even feel it while I'm talking about it. In my head, I'm thinking about the story of heliocentrism. And like, I get excited about that story. And it'll infuse you. You'll feel better. At the end of the day, if you feel better as a teacher, if you feel it, your students will feel it.
Yes.
They will feel differently about mathematics when they see that you feel it. You're a math teacher. You do feel it. But sometimes those pressures keep you from being able to show that to students. One thing, try one thing that allows you to show more clearly to students why you love math. Because most of you teaching mathematics, you probably didn't fall in love with math because you were just really good at factoring seventh degree polynomials. That's probably not.
Whatever those are. That's why I max out at grade 3. We just start to get into multisyllabic reading words, so they do not enter the math curriculum. But, I love that you were mentioning there, I myself felt myself light up when you talked about story. And I believe it's Richard Wagnes that says we are all story. And I believe that is the piece that connects all the threads in our curriculum is story, because we are all story. So thank you for reminding us of that beautiful change. So I'm hearing, get the kids standing, get some random grouping going, tell some stories. Is there one other tip that you could give if you were trying to get the kids in your class to reshape their minds, to start to think that they're math people? Is there one other tip that you can give us to start doing that this September?
Give yourself permission to mark less and engage more.
I love it. Yeah, mark less and engage more. The engagement is really what matters.
Your student doesn't need more marks. They need you. And I really have a hard time believing that any parent wouldn't agree with that statement. Yeah. And if you're, when you feel those pressures, if parents are bothering you and, well, you need to mark more, phrase it back to them. There's only so many hours in the day. What would you prefer I use this time for? Do you want me to use this time to put a bunch of check marks and X's on your child's page and hand it back with a mark on the top? Or do you want me to have a minute to actually look them in the eye and have a conversation?
I would choose option B, that's for sure.
I think most parents, I can't speak for all parents, but I do believe, with my experience, I do believe most parents would be okay with that. And in fact, my experience with parents has almost universally been, at the end of things, very positive. And the reason for that is that parents fundamentally want the same things that you want for their kids. I want my child to become a better learner. I want my child to engage in a love of learning. I want my child to grow. Okay, here is a great path forward. And if parents aren't convinced by that, or your administrators aren't convinced like that, here's some research that's actually been done that says absolutely, here is the way to help students grow. If you really want them to grow, this is the path we have to take. And it's an everybody wins path. Teachers will be happier, students will be happier. And if teachers are happier, invariably students will be happier. And when students are happier, invariably parents are going to be happier. And when parents are happier, invariably your school administrative team is going to be happier. All of this comes from the same point. Are your teachers happy? From them, all things will flow.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights and experiences with us today. Your passion came through, and all educators can gain something from listening to what you just shared with us about how we can develop our children to become mathematical people for their entire lives, rather than just from K to 12 or K to 3 or however long they make it in the system before they start to convince themselves that perhaps they are not math people, which I think you've showed us today that we all are math people, and that there is actionable steps that we can take right now in our classrooms to help reshape the minds of our kids today.
Yeah, no, it was my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation to talk about this. When we all listen to each other, that's when the real learning can really start to happen, right? And if we all try to put our empathetic foot forward, it puts us all in a better space.
I love it. Empathy is the way to go. Thank you so much for your time, Aaron.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.